So with logistics aside, I want to turn the podium over to Dan Lopresti, who will be chairing our next session. And I have all sorts of great notes that I took, and then I have things that I learned last night. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to integrate all this. But Dan received his bachelor's from Dartmouth in '82 and his graduate degree from Princeton. And you do have to ask him at the break how he came to be the Grand Marshal of the P-Raid, which is a revered celebration at Princeton. I know because I lived outside that area for some time. While he was at Princeton, he went to found what became the Panasonic Information Technology Laboratory there, and continued his research also at Bell Labs. And then in 2003, he joined the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Lehigh, and he's continued his research on fundamental algorithmic system-related questions and things such as pattern recognition, bioinformatics, and security. So all topics highly relevant to the discussions that we have today. In 2009, he was convinced to become chair. He also did a stint as interim dean, and then continues as chair of that department, as well as the director of the DataX Strategic Initiative. More personally, he's been on the CCC since 2014. He's just a terrific colleague and collaborator. He is the co-chair of our task force on intelligent infrastructure. And in that role, he was co-author of one of our papers examining the role of intelligent infrastructure in terms of natural disaster response and resilience. So turning over the podium to him for our first session. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Beth. Let me see if I can tee up our next presentation.
This is the hard part.
I think I got it. All right. So I'm extremely pleased to be moderating this morning's session on intelligent infrastructure, which brings together a national group of experts with broad perspectives in this very important area. As Beth indicated in her opening remarks, this is an incredibly timely topic right now, and Beth also nicely foreshadowed some of the important issues and opportunities you'll hear about this morning. Planned major investments in infrastructure should buy us the best, most cost-effective solutions with an eye toward the future. This will mean incorporating substantial levels of intelligence in the infrastructure. This intelligence will be enabled by widespread deployment of sensing systems, reliable network access with sufficient bandwidth, improvements in cyber-physical security, and ongoing advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Work at the human-computer interface will also be vitally important. There are significant implications for our citizens in terms of health and safety, quality of life, national security, and economic competitiveness. And while intelligent infrastructure will provide significant benefits across the entire country, applications built on top of that infrastructure, for example, improvements to transportation and agriculture, will require a workforce that has the skills to innovate and to maintain the technology so that it is robust and secure. New high-quality jobs will be created, and significant investments in workforce retraining will be required to achieve the greatest benefits. I want to say a few words about the schedule for this morning. We'll begin with a keynote talk by Michael Dunaway. Then we'll have time for just a couple questions after Michael's talk. Then we'll have a half-hour coffee break, after which we'll pick up with a panel session. At the end of the panel session, we've allowed quite a bit of time for questions and answers, so please make sure you write down your questions and are prepared when we get to that point in the agenda. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Michael Dunaway. Michael is director of the National Incident Management Systems and Advanced Technologies Institute, NIMSAT, and research professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. The NIMSAT Institute seeks to enhance the resiliency of the United States and its communities by conducting research, building public-private partnerships, and developing advanced technologies that support the first responder and homeland security communities and contribute to the mission of saving lives and mitigating the consequences of natural and human-caused disasters. In that capacity, he also serves as director of the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center on behalf of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. He is also chairman of the Smart Public Safety Initiative of the Global City Teams Challenge, sponsored by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Previously, Michael served as Senior Director for Preparedness and Resilience Programs at the National Headquarters of the American Red Cross, as Chief for Risk Management and Program Manager at the Science and Technology Directorate, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and as a Program Manager in the Warfighter Protection Division of the Office of Naval Research. A graduate of the United States Naval Academy, he served as a surface line officer in the U.S. Navy, retiring from active duty at the rank of captain. He holds an MA in International Relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, and a PhD in Systems Engineering from George Washington University. He's a founding partner of AE Analytics, a veteran-owned small business specializing in risk management and strategic planning. His home is in Annapolis, Maryland, where he has served as a sailing coach for the U.S. Naval Academy Offshore Sail Training Squadron. And I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Michael Dunaway.
Anticipate that you would read the whole darn thing. Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be here to serve as a plenary speaker to kick off this really important conference and symposium. And Dan, I want to thank you personally and Ann and Beth for providing me the opportunity and the invitation to serve in this capacity and to talk to you a little bit about what the challenges are that we all face and that we all will solve because we must solve them. I have to tell you right off the bat that I am not a computer scientist. The only language I know how to code in is Morse. For those of you who know anything at all about Morse code or even understand what I'm talking about, I was not in on the joke that Dan was actually playing on Beth when he invited, I guess, a dozen or so of you to serve as plenary speaker, and you all declined because you knew the joke. And so he worked his way down the list and got to me, and I was not in on the joke, so I said yes. So here I am. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to spending some time with you all during the next couple of days at this conference. What I want to talk about, let's see, I think I've got to queue up a different briefing here somewhere.
Green is forward.
Yeah, but there we go. Oh, super. Thank you very much. What I want to do is talk a little bit about a blueprint process that is underway for developing smart cities and building infrastructure, both cognitive, civil, and civic infrastructures for smart cities, and offer an opportunity for all of us to get engaged in that process because it directly relates to public-private partnerships that are actually building these smart cities right now. And we have a number of them, almost 200 of them that are underway right now. And then I want to talk a little bit about, give an overview of some of the hazards and risks and the threats that we face that we must solve, because this is where we're going in the future, and the solutions must be developed for the work that that will engage the work that we're doing. So here's the theme for the day. I'm not a Yankees fan, but I'm a great fan of Yogi Berra, who I think is the great political philosopher of the 20th century. The issue here, this is a dual-edged comment. This is a double-edged sword here. The future ain't what it used to be in both a bad way and a good way. And it is up to us to make sure that it goes in the right direction, because that's what we do as designers and engineers and computer scientists and researchers and teachers. Particularly that. So this is where we're going. Ann has actually, Beth has already talked in some detail about the agenda for today, but the agenda for this conference actually sets up the dilemmas or the paradoxes that we are facing on a routine basis. And so we have security and privacy versus accessibility and convenience. You know, we have a nation here that's over 200 years old, and it has been designed from the beginning on the concept of open access, convenience, fluidity, the availability of information, and access to everyone at everything, and nowadays at almost any time. And that gives us a lot of cause for concern with regard to security and particularly with regard to privacy. And then there's the other piece of this, which is in an open democratic society, we are engaged right now in a very significant debate about the limits of the democratic model and the democratic process, and how that balances versus security and whether there are walls that need to be built around that democracy, both physical and otherwise, to ensure its future. And then the artificial intelligence issue Beth has already touched on. There's going to be an entire session on this, human versus human abilities and character, and how we need to separate those two, or whether we should separate those two, whether artificial intelligence should basically be indistinguishable from human thought processes, or whether actually they should be required by some standardization process to specifically be distinguishable from human thought processes, so we know who we're talking to. It's those kind of questions that are really fundamental to this. And then the issues of algorithms and efficiency versus fairness and equitability really gets to the human resources things in hiring. These issues come up right now as to whether algorithms are acceptable ways to decide who gets hired and who does not. So a whole range of those questions. And to this, I would add even one, and I would summarize this, I would lump this into a couple of other categories that are much bigger. Are we at a stage right now where we're looking at progress and growth versus sustainability and the long-term carrying capacity of the Earth, plus the long-term carrying capacity of societies and social constructs? And then there's the issue of technology revolution or evolution, depending on the time frame you want to put on this, versus quality of life, both at the individual scale and at the social scale. And our problem we face right now, we haven't even defined what quality of life actually is in the midst of a technology revolution. And we're in the middle of one, and we know what the impacts are, but we haven't defined what's good and what's bad. So we have a lot of challenges here. All of us know that actually this is the real challenge, is we have to do all of this. It's not an either or. We're actually moving forward, and we have to think about how we're going to incorporate all of these safety controls and concepts into the society that we're building as we're building it. So this is the real challenge. So here's a model, a way to think about this process right now. The natural environment we're all very familiar with. I'll talk more about that and some of its problems here shortly. But the real issue here is that little bottom bullet, the biosphere, this thin membrane of life that exists on top of our planet, which, as we recognize, is beginning to seem a little fragile and on occasion a little vengeful. And we have to live within that. And then on top of that, we have built our own environment. So this is the built environment of cities, architectures, built systems, transportation networks, engineered systems, and everything that we have constructed for our society, our human society. And on top of that, or living within it actually, we have the social environment. And this is all of us, the human beings that occupy this space. Everything else is just a bunch of empty shells. But it's the humans involved in this, or that exist inside this, that are the real subject. And then here's our space. As scientists, we inhabit a completely separate environment. And this is cognitive. It is an informational ecosystem. It's also artificial. It's a virtual environment we have created for ourselves. It has no tangible being in and of itself, although its effects are tangible all over the place. So these four relationships are what constitute the world we live in. And the interesting thing about the top one here, I'll test my system here. This one here is how we understand the rest of them. And we understand the relationships, we understand how we model them and understand the environments. We interact with the features in each of these independently, but also together. So this is the system that we have built, that you all build, that allows us to both engage with and understand these other three and their relationships to one another and to us. So this is kind of a model for thinking about what it is we do and where the world is going right now, and how we are building it as we move forward. A little bit about myself. I run what's called the National Incident Management Systems and Advanced Technologies Institute. It is a research and development center that really focuses on homeland security, emergency management, risk analysis, and those kind of functions. It is within the Informatics Research Institute of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. So although I am not a data scientist or a computer scientist myself, I work with those who are very intelligent, mostly very young people, who are really super at what they do. They know codes beyond Morse, and they're really good at them. And I work very closely with them in terms of looking at how we build systems that are both resilient, reliable, but also answer really significant questions in the emergency management and homeland security realm and those kind of things. And then the interesting thing is that I have a corollary job. I have a second job, and that job is to direct the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center for the state of Louisiana. And this BEOC, we call it the LABEOC. The LABEOC is one of probably about a half a dozen functional business emergency operations centers in the country, run mostly at the state and regional level. Some municipalities have them. But its mission is to basically tie professional emergency management, largely at the state and parish or county level, in with the private sector on the broad scale. So this is small businesses, large businesses, transportation hubs, nonprofit organizations, everything that occupies the private sector in a state. Bring those resources to bear to build a more resilient community and also make them available in times of disaster. So a state's emergency operations center, the Louisiana Emergency Operations Center, can tap into the resources that exist at the state level rather than having to call them in from the federal government. And this has two benefits. One is we keep our money in our state, so we revitalize the commercial sector, get the commerce back up online as quickly as possible because we're actually using state resources and we're paying for them as we go, and we're revitalizing the business community. The other side is that we actually work with the business community to make them more resilient, and things like business continuity planning and those kind of initiatives to build resilience and capacity inside the business community so we're not as susceptible to disasters. So I have two roles, and the interesting thing is that the research center that I lead actually has direct access to its customer base through the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And this allows us both to see the needs at the operational level, at the state level, and then because we work with FEMA and FEMA Region 6 and with Department of Homeland Security, what those requirements are at the federal level and feed our products directly into them, but by the same token understand what their agendas are for real needs for research and development work. So it's a really symbiotic relationship that all kind of focuses on the research center that I run. Okay, so here's what we've been doing for the last year under the Business Emergency Operations Center. So you all may or may not remember that as August last year, Louisiana was hit with the hardest rainstorm I have ever seen in my life. And talking to some of the old folks, even their grandparents had never seen rain like we had. We have 56 parishes, or we have 64 parishes or counties in the state of Louisiana. Between March and August, when we had one set of rainstorms, serious rainstorms in March and another one in August, we had 56 of those 64 parishes under a presidential disaster declaration. That's about 85% of the state's scope of the territory. The flooding lasted for about, the rain lasted for 4 days, the flooding lasted for about 4 weeks before it began to subside. We're in the middle of recovering from this right now, and we probably will be for another year or so because the economic impact, particularly in agriculture, has been really significant. So this was last year. Then we have this year. So this is the 2017 hurricane season here. Hurricane Harvey, Irma, Maria, Nate. There were 2 others. I'll mention those in a minute. This is the track here of the 2017, and over on this side here, I'm sorry. I promise, Dan, I will miss you. Those are the tracks of the 2017 hurricane season. This is what it looked like. Now, the interesting thing, and the reason I put this graphic up here is every one of these graphics, with the exception of really 2 of them, this one, which is a satellite image, and this one's a satellite image, this is a superimposed, enhanced satellite image. These are all products of computer-generated science and technology work, research and development. These images here, this one is a particularly interesting image because the track that Hurricane Nate followed when it made landfall really in Mississippi at the boundary between Mississippi and Louisiana was almost precisely what had been predicted. And in fact, the hurricane tracks that we've seen this year, although the cones have been wide, the prediction factor has been very high. And that's because we have gotten so good at predicting not just surface environment, but the upper atmosphere and the interactions at the stratospheric level for weather pattern models. And that is a function of the work that you do. So the sophistication that we now have that enables us to do this kind of predictive analytics and actually see it bear out is a function of this kind of work. And it has a real impact on things like whether you evacuate. I was involved in a conversation with the governor of Louisiana and a bunch of other people at the State Emergency Operations Center. Do we evacuate New Orleans or not? And he had a 48-hour window to make that decision, and we were 24 hours away from the time he had to make the decision at the time we were having the conversation. So he had to he had 24 hours to decide whether to evacuate New Orleans based on previous history. As you all know, we did not. And we did not because this track was so accurate, and we had such a good sense of predictive direction of what the next 24 hours, next 48 hours held. That's the result of the work. That's a multi-million-dollar cost saving right there. And also, the storm did not deviate from its path because of the predictions were so good. So this is part of where we are right now. All right, so this is all analytics. This is all graphics. It's computer generated. Behind it is the reality. Okay. So here's Hurricane Harvey. Those are real human beings out there. That is Hurricane Harvey, just off the coast of Texas, just before it made landfall. So that was 24 to 28 August. A week later, here was Hurricane Irma. Great, I love this picture of this little girl heading into heading into a storm shelter in Coral Gables. This guy, I understand, was actually saved. I don't know how you do that. But at any rate, according to the little story, he was actually returned to the sea. Search and rescue teams that are staging. Here's St. Thomas, St. Martin, Havana. The photographs of Puerto Rico I did not use in this slide. A week later, here's Hurricane Maria. I don't think you can see it because the magenta color doesn't come out. There's Puerto Rico right there, that little bitty square. This is Puerto Rico in mid-July, before the storms hit. That's its Earth signature light at night. This was it 3 weeks later. That's what it looks like now. There's only about 40% of the island that has electrical power at all. And it's going to continue on like this for a long time to come. By the way, Hurricane Irma, at the time that it passed about 60 miles north of Puerto Rico, was the strongest Category 5 hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic. So the impact, and then a week later, this one was dead center on Puerto Rico. So that's a circumstance. Then, a week later, 10 days later, we have Hurricane Nate, which at the time it was tracking when it left Costa Rica, where these photographs were made. There was significant damage in Costa Rica, not quite so much on the continental United States. This was the fastest moving hurricane ever tracked in the Atlantic. It was moving at about 20 knots, about 24 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. Tracked straight up through there. Mercifully, it had dissipated to about a Force 1 a Category 1 hurricane by the time it made landfall. So its effect was not as serious, but it's been a heck of a season. That's in the space of about 6 weeks. We had that. Then there's this. Beth alluded to this earlier on. I hope your wine cellars are stocked because the prices are going up for California wine. Not to make light of this issue. This is a huge tragedy for a lot of families and a beautiful region and country. Then there's this. Okay. Count this morning was, I think, 59 deaths as a result of this, 250 casualties, something like this. Recall that the Barcelona terrorist attack took place in mid-August. There were 16 people killed, I think, if I remember the numbers right. 16 people killed here, a number injured. And then this goes all the way back to Manchester. This is the one that truly frightens me, and I'll tell you why in a second. This is the Manchester terrorist attack. There were 60 people. I think there were 56 casualties. So there's 56 deaths from this, 250 casualties. Here's why this is so bad. The bomb that went off inside the Manchester Stadium took place outside the security perimeter where bags were being checked. Think about this the next time you go to DCA to take a flight. This is the real problem because this was outside the security zone. So where do we put security zones? It's this kind of problem. So these are the problems we're facing right now. Let me put this in a little bit broad, whoops, wrong button. A little bit broader perspective. There was a study done in 2006, a quick study chartered by the National League of Cities in 2016 that was looking at the top 10 issues facing cities in the future. And this was an analysis of 100 speeches given by 100 mayors of the 100 largest cities in the country over the period of 4 months. So January to about mid-April of 2016, made a bunch of speeches. The top 2 issues are economic development and public safety. All the way around here, 75 to 70% of those speeches mentioned those 2 as the highest priority issue they faced. Here's something for you all. Healthcare and data and technology were the 2 bottom issues, 18 and 20%. That's your realm. You got to figure out how to get a stronger voice with the mayors of the nation, because they need your work. But that's what they know about you at this stage of the game. Okay, so I chair a committee of what's called the Global City Teams Challenge. This is a public-private partnership, very broad public-private partnership involving about 200 cities globally that are looking at questions that face cities and communities and nations that are directly related to the welfare of the city. And some of this is like, how do we catalog potholes and maintain pothole management? Things like, how do we monitor environment, and what is the impact on the public health, and how do we evaluate those 2? And then what dimensions do we incorporate into public safety, which is the area that I'm particularly concerned about. Last year, these had been geographically organized. So Portland, Oregon had one, Austin, Texas had one, Chicago had one. They were all oriented regionally. Where they are right now is we decided to cluster them last year into thematic arenas. So we are using, I can barely see my own slides here. You probably can't see this at all. So safety, mobility, equity, transportation systems, public health. Apologize for the slide here. This is not a particularly good one. The next one is better. So here are the 5 current superclusters, we called them, because we took the clusters that were geographic and we put them all into what we called superclusters. One on Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi systems. Another one on improving really transit and freight. They called it last mile connections. That's where the hard questions reside. But it has to do with multimodal transportation systems. Designing smart city data platform. This is the city dashboard. How do you communicate between the population, the agencies, and the city government, and do it in an open source, in an open forum, so everybody understands what the city is doing? Another one here is a framework for public utilities. This is energy, water, and waste systems. That's being led by Atlanta. Each one of these has a lead city, obviously. This one's being led by Atlanta. The one that I chair is the Blueprint for Smart Public Safety in Connected Communities. Our lead city is Washington, D.C., which has a very vibrant public safety component to what it's doing, but it also happens to be the headquarters, the home city of Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, and the other agencies that work this space. So it's a real good relationship for us. And then we have 3 that are coming online. They're not formed yet, but one on healthcare, agriculture in rural areas, and data governance and exchange. So what are the rules that we should have? Like the one I mentioned about AI. Should we be able to distinguish between AI systems and real human thought? Or do we want them to be almost indistinguishable, or actually indistinguishable? Those kind of rules and governance systems that stretch out into the future and how we're going to live with all this stuff. So these are the processes that we're looking at right now. And the most important part of this is these are open forum for you to join with your city. In the public safety sector, it's an open invitation from us. I want everybody on the public sector, the private sector, agencies, governments, anybody we can get to join in the public safety dialogue and think about how we build a smart public safety system for smart connected communities in the future. That's an open invitation for all of us, for each of us. The main goal that we had was to build a blueprint. And the blueprint is what it says it is. It's a blueprint on how smart cities can be formed ostensibly without the pain we've gone through for about the last 4 years to figure out how to do this. And we've published these blueprints, and they exist. Sorry, let me back up a tad here. I think it's the next slide. I'll talk about the blueprint for smart public safety here. Yeah, I got that. Yeah, good, thank you. In looking at smart public safety, we looked at the entire universe, everything from first responders to emergency managers on the broad scale, and then the community itself. And we looked across the entire all hazards community of natural, industrial, or man-made causes, plus causes like terrorism. So we took an all hazards, whole of community approach to what public safety is. So it's a very wide swath. We published our blueprint for smart public safety. This is what I wanted to get at. Blueprint for smart public safety, but all of the supercluster blueprints are published on this page on the NIST website. So they're all accessible to all of you. This is the goal that we have. This is our charter. Broad goal of PSSC is to develop, integrate, and pilot technology applications and test both new operating systems and technologies, but also new operating concepts in public safety. So again, very broad swath, broad charter, and we wrote it that way intentionally, so it's open-ended for all of us. These are the cities that are involved in the Smart Public Safety group that I lead, and I'm just going to let you look at that for a second to get a sense of the range of the technology development efforts that are actually being engaged by these communities. So these are projects already underway that are seeking additional solutions and additional enhancement to their abilities over time. So that's where we're going with that. We've learned a few things so far, and these are kind of common themes out of all these superclusters right now. First thing, develop the strategic plan and a common sense architecture before you invest in something brand new. So know where you're going before you start developing. Leverage the existing and proven technologies and problem solutions before you launch an expensive research and development effort, because you may find somebody else has already done this. And this is actually the goal of the Global City Teams Challenge, is to build a community of people that are talking about how to apply advanced technology and computing systems to challenges in smart public cities. And then understand the organization, often cultural change, which is required to implement these things. So in a nutshell, ask the right questions, identify the real problems, and define the resources that you need, and also the resources that you have available that you may not have thought of in the right way. So kind of closing here, going back to the challenge that we all face is to do both of these all at the same time. And then from my perspective, leading a public safety group, I was very gratified to see the term Blue Sky Days actually show up in your own work. Emergency management frequently talks about blue sky and dark sky. Blue sky is when you do training, you do planning, you do liaison with the public sector and the private sector and those kind of things. And then there's dark sky when you actually mobilize and you operate and you try to either respond to it, or you respond to a disaster or an emergency, and then you recover from it afterwards. Nobody's practicing anything at that stage, and it's all dark. And then you try to put the lights on, literally. So these are the challenges that we face, both down here and then across this entire spectrum. We have to do all of this in order to build not simply the cities of the present, but the cities of the future. So I want to thank you all for the work that you are doing and the opportunity here to talk to you all today and put this in kind of my frame of reference, but also bring my frame of reference to this to you. I will close by, there's this famous statement by Leon Trotsky. You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Okay, so in my realm, it's you may not be interested in disasters and civil emergencies, but they are interested in you. We are also interested in the technology work that you're doing, and you are working in public safety, whether you know it or not. So please think about what you do, both in terms of building resilience into your projects, but also ensuring that they have a place to go and that they can contribute to the larger safety and security of the population of the nation. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Yes.
I just want to clear up one point before we move on. Michael was most certainly our first choice. And you can now understand exactly why, having heard him speak. My fear after the recent, we had invited him before this recent CCC Masters, my fear was we were going to get a call from him saying that unfortunately he was unable to make it, because I know he's been incredibly busy actually doing the work on the ground to help in these extraordinary situations. We have time for maybe just one or two questions right now. If there's any pressing questions, if you do ask a question, there are microphones here, so I've asked you to, everyone should know we're live streaming this event, so try to use the microphones when you speak.
All right, so my name is Mark Hill, University of Wisconsin, and CCC Vice Chair. So I can imagine that big cities such as Chicago, New York, and LA can devote substantial resources to the future, but as you go down in size into rural communities, not so much. So how do we avoid a sampling bias in this, where we develop solutions that help part of America but not the rest?
Yes, sir. That's a great question. That actually, I'll even broaden that a little bit. How do we do the work we're doing and benefit not the top 10% of us, but all of us? And that's a big cultural challenge across the board. The place, I think the place where we're trying to crack that nut first, and I'll talk about the Global City Teams Challenge, there's a big emphasis on Wi-Fi in rural regions to get them connected in with everything else that's going on. So that's kind of a starting point. Some of this gets to the issue that we can't build, get to sort of immediate technology. We can't build enough fiber optic networks to make that happen. So maybe we need to talk about satellite streaming of Wi-Fi networks. And even geostationary UAVs that basically have 60 to 90 day hover times over regions, and we just build a complete Wi-Fi bubble over the entire over a region. We are doing that. We're beginning to do that in disaster management now, where we are putting up drones. We're actually testing a few of these in this system that will establish a Wi-Fi network when comms are lost over a disaster impact zone, so we can maintain Wi-Fi communication and cellular communication when nothing else works. But it's the connectedness that is, I think, the first place to go. But you're absolutely right. We're looking at how do we help the most advanced systems, the most advanced communities, the most advanced technologies. A big piece of the challenge resides on the other side of that spectrum. And we really need to make that those are the kinds of investments that you all as a group need to lobby for, quite frankly, because we need to build the whole nation and join the whole community up. So yes, sir, it's a challenge. You're right. We don't have any solutions on that yet, but we're working on it. Thank you for the question, though.
We do one more question, and then we'll have the break, and there'll be a lot of time for questions after the panel on the same topic area.
So I think your answer came to a nice setup for my question. My name is Tim Winiger from the University of Notre Dame, and I'm wondering how much does technology in the midst of a disaster get in the way versus help? And I think if we have smart roads and smart cities and cameras that run the stoplights and what have you, when the power goes out and then people rely upon these systems for day-to-day, hour-to-hour information, logistics and distribution and so on, when the power goes out, what happens? So that seems to be if you incorporate lots of technology into these systems and then when they fail, it seems to exacerbate the problem. So what do you think of that?
Again, there's a cultural dimension to this and there is a technology dimension to this. So you ask certain older generation first responders, firefighters, police, they don't want any more damn technology. They got enough. All they want is a radio that works. I've heard them say this many times. All they want is a radio that works. But they want to know that it works all the time and it's on the right channel, and that the channel connects in with the guys who aren't on radios, they're actually on cell phones. So, all of a sudden this begins to change a little bit. There is a cultural bias, a cultural change that's underway about that issue. By and large, the emergency management community wants the new technologies. The problem they have is incorporating it into their doctrine. So we're having to write new doctrine to incorporate the new technologies. and do the training that allows them to understand the doctrine to incorporate the technologies. So that's one set of problems. The other set of problems gets to the issue of resilience and durability, and you're absolutely correct. Technology is always a two-edged sword. The more you incorporate it, the more you learn to rely on it. I mean, anybody here who does not have a cell phone with them right now, left it in their hotel room, I bet you're sweating right now, aren't you? If you forgot it, you're really nervous. We've got to a point where we can't go anywhere without it. But on the same token, I'll give you an example. In my cell phone, I have a survival guide from the British Special Forces. I have the American Red Cross handbook. I have at least 4 first aid manuals. I've never opened any one of them. But if I ever had to, I know where I can get the information on whether I should stop bleeding first, resuscitate, or treat for shock. It's in my little handbook in my cell phone. I've never opened it, but I know it's there.
Until the battery runs out.
Yeah, but I have a solar charger.
Okay.
And I also have one of these. And I also have 2 little backup packs as well. So, that's how you have to think, right?
Right.
So, yeah, we need to think about redundancy of our systems. We become more dependent. You have to think about, how do I maintain my ability to continue being dependent on this stuff, because it does connect me in with my family. So we need to think about redundancy. You need to think about a systems approach to all this stuff. That's kind of what we're doing. That's what you all do.
Let's thank Michael one last